Welcome back, everyone, to the Higher Ed Power BI user group. It's June 20th, 2024. Glad to see everyone again. Coming to you from my home office this time and ready for another month of learning about Power BI. To our newcomers, just a reminder that the mission of this user group is to train, educate, and connect data professionals who work with Microsoft Power BI at colleges and universities. Glad to see a lot of, looks like we got some new folks, and we have a lot of our returning customers as well. So it's awesome to see you all. As usual, we'll begin the meeting with a quick overview of where we are in terms of Power BI versions. If you're using the Power BI service in the cloud, the latest version is June 2024. And if you're using Power BI Report Server, which is the on-premises platform for hosting Power BI reports, the latest version is May 2024. These are both very recent releases, and they're both pretty small releases too. There's not a whole lot going on in the June release for the cloud, and there's even less going on in the May release for Report Server. So not a whole lot to report on that. I will be sending out my usual post-meeting message with links to a couple of blog posts about the feature summaries for both the cloud and the report server. So stay tuned for that after the meeting, and you'll get a lot more detail about what is actually happening in those releases. Moving on to some announcements, happy to report that we actually passed 600 members since our last meetup. So we continue to grow, and that's fantastic. Really glad to have so many people joining, and hopefully we can continue the engagement on Slack and other channels. Also happy to report that thanks to James, we've gotten Ben Ferry, who is working at the International University of Applied Sciences, to join the user group leadership team. Those of you with some previous experience in Power BI might know Ben already from his presence on YouTube. He's known as Power BI Guy. Now, this is an important note because there are two Power BI guys on YouTube. There is the Power BI Guy, and then there's Power BI Guy. And Ben is Power BI minus the word the. So just important note there.
Yeah. He's
Ben,
also the original Power BI guy. Yeah, I think the other guy came along after him.
But Ben's been a fixture of the Power BI community for a few years. I saw his channel. He's particularly well known for his content around Deneb, which is a third-party visual for Power BI, which is based on a language called Vega and Vega Lite, and you can use Vega for creating basically custom visuals inside of Power BI. And I'm a big fan of Deneb. Ben is one of the more prominent YouTubers in the Power BI community talking about Deneb. So that's why most people know him, is his contributions to the community there. But he's going to be joining the leadership team, hopefully in the next couple of months. He works in Germany, is it, James? He's based out of
Yeah,
Germany?
he's based in Berlin, and the university he works for is also based in Germany. Yep, but they're an international university. They're like a primarily remote, so people attend from wherever they live.
Yeah. So we're glad to have Ben joining the leadership team. I think having someone with his experience would be a big benefit for us. The next monthly meetup is July 17th, 2024. Our featured speaker is going to be Tom Martins, who is like our resident MVP, James, who is also a Microsoft MVP. Tom comes to us from Germany, and he's going to be teaching us fundamentals of using DAX in Power BI next month. So those of you who are beginners in the world of Power BI, this is a meeting that you definitely want to attend. Tom's going to give us a good overview of DAX, how it works, what you can do with it, some of the fundamentals that will help you sort of boost your usage of DAX in Power BI. So you don't want to miss that one. As usual, after today's meeting, look out for an email from Meetup containing links to our YouTube channel, our Slack workspace, a couple of forums where you can submit ideas or volunteer to speak at an upcoming meeting, and of course to RSVP for our next meeting in July. So, without further ado, Our intro was pretty quick because I want to get straight into the topic for today. James is going to be teaching us about the Data Dojo, a Power BI community of practice. This is a data governance and literacy framework that James pioneered at Des Moines University, and he's been evangelizing this framework across the world. Recently, I think you just came back from Prague, wasn't it? Where
Yep.
you gave, did you give this talk in Prague?
Yeah, this presentation I just gave at the Data Point Prague conference, which is the inaugural. So they're planning on having this conference every year. This is the first time they've had it, and it was organized by Data Brothers, which is a Microsoft partner in Prague, in the Czech Republic, and I'm pretty close friends with Stepan Rešel, who is one of the partners at that firm. So he helped connect me with the conference organizers, and then that was the I've also given a very earlier, a much less developed version of this presentation about a year ago on the Havens Consulting YouTube channel, but only about half as much material was covered in that one because I'd only actually had about half as much activity over the course of the time that I've been working with the Data Dojo to talk about the experiences. So lots happened since then, and so there's a lot of new content that anybody who wasn't at that conference in Prague last month, this will be the first time that anybody's heard about that stuff. So
Great. Well, just a reminder, if you've got questions for James during the presentation, please drop them in the chat window. Myself and Jeff, we will be monitoring the chat. So if we see any of your stuff come up, we'll try to work that question into James either during the presentation or probably after. So just feel free to go ahead and start asking questions.
Yep.
James, I will stop sharing and turn it over to you, my friend.
yeah, and I'll say any questions that you have that are related to something that I'm talking about while I'm talking about it, feel free to just ping them in, and Pete and Jeff, you guys can interrupt me if you want, in the middle of, and because I think it'd be easier to answer questions kind of in line than stacking them all up at the end. If it seems like a question is going to be a little more involved, we might say let's hold off on that one till the end, but otherwise I'll just answer them in line. This can be a pretty informal format. So, all right, I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Here we go. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my session called the Data Dojo, Power BI Community Practice. Let's get started. So first of all, a little bit about me. A lot of you probably have never heard of me. Here's some stuff about myself. My name is James Bartlett. I'm a senior BI analyst at Des Moines University in Iowa. I was recently awarded Microsoft MVP for contributions in the Power BI community. I'm a certified Fabric Analytics Engineer Associate and a certified Power BI Data Analyst Associate. And in my spare time, of course, I'm a co-organizer of this user group. I'm also a co-organizer of the Iowa Power BI user group, and I'm a contributor on open source software projects on GitHub. And I've shared links for that stuff in the chat as well. So if people want to check that stuff out, feel free to do that. I'll also have links to that at the end of the presentation here as well. All right. And then, of course, everything I'm saying here is only just my own opinions, has nothing to do with my employers or other organizations I'm affiliated with. So take everything I'm saying here with a grain of salt. All right. So we'll go over our agenda here. First, I'm going to talk about what it's like founding the Data Dojo, the process of getting this group together and establishing it in the first place. We'll talk about the recruitment process. I call it calling all data ninjas. And we'll talk about what happened in our first couple of workshops. Then some mistakes that I made along the way that caused us to have some setbacks, and what you can do to make sure that you avoid making those same mistakes. We'll talk about what the process of basically coming back from those setbacks. The next 3 workshops following that comeback, and then a new format of workshops that we've just recently introduced called Office Hours and Coffee Lounge. And how that works and the benefits of doing different styles of events. And then I'll provide those resources at the end, like I mentioned earlier, and then we'll do a little Q&A. All right. So first of all, we're going to talk about founding the Data Dojo. So but before we actually talk about starting it, let's talk about what is a community of practice. Has anyone? I guess I can't see anybody's hand, so I can't say raise your hand if you've heard of a Power BI of a community of practice. But the concept of community practice actually predates Power BI by a long shot. Communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern or passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. This is Etienne and Beverly Wenger Trainer in June of 2015. And I guess maybe that doesn't predate Power BI. I don't remember exactly what month in 2015 Power BI came out, but it's basically like the idea is it goes way beyond just working with data. It's basically any group of people that gets together and shares knowledge and skills that they've learned with each other. It could even be like things like a book club or a knitting club or things like that. So one thing that's important to know is that when we say community practice, it's not the same thing as saying the center of excellence. And so people have been looking at the Power BI adoption roadmap for a while will probably be familiar with the idea of the center of excellence. But they are actually two. The center of excellence is actually one of the components of a community of practice if it's implemented as a Power BI community of practice. And here I'll actually show you what that looks like. So let's see. How do I turn on my laser pointer? I think it's this guy. There we go. All right. So the center of excellence, as you can see here, that's just this portion of the community practice as a whole. And this visual was taken from the Power BI adoption roadmap. And so the whole community practice is all of these subgroups. So we have the self-service content creators and subject matter experts. Of those people, some people are considered kind of like the champions. And these are people who are producing reports that are being consumed by content consumers. And then the center of excellence is people who typically are going to be more like people who are working in the IT department or in a dedicated analytics team where they are responsible for creating and maintaining centralized like models, data pipelines, data flows, things like that, and kind of setting the standards for like best practices in the organization, doing things like analysis, like large scale analysis of like activity logs of like if you have a premium capacity or fabric capacity in your organization, these people would be the ones who would be responsible for making sure that those capacities are being used properly and that they're not getting throttled by workloads that are inefficient, that sort of thing. So in the community practice, the idea is to have a center of excellence, and sometimes this is just one person who happens to be the dedicated IT person for working with the data stuff, and then they will work with the champions, which would be kind of like the subject matter experts in their teams throughout the organization, so outside of IT, and then subject matter experts who may be less technical but know their data really well. Those would be kind of like what we might call a data steward. So someone who can be trusted to, if there's an end user who says, hey, there's a problem with this report, and then the report author says, well, I didn't change anything, then it's like, okay, well, we need to figure out what did change, and it's probably the data, and it's probably at the source. And if we talk to a subject matter expert, they're likely to be able to find where that problem originated. So yeah, this is a whole ecosystem of different roles, and all of this together is the community of practice. All right, we'll move on here. So here's the story of the Data Dojo at Des Moines University. So the backstory, I guess you could say, coming from before we established the Data Dojo, we are a graduate level medical school. Most of our faculty and staff have advanced degrees in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or STEM. There's a strong culture of evidence-based, data-driven decision-making, as you might imagine. People who are training doctors, most of them are doctors already, and so they are already very accustomed to the idea that, hey, if you're going to propose a hypothesis, you better have the data to back it up. So that's pretty nice. In a lot of ways, it makes it a lot easier to work with the stakeholders in the organization who are already familiar with how important it is for the data to be clean, for us to be skeptical when we see data that comes in, and not just treat it at face value, that sort of thing. So that's nice. However, on the other side of that, we're also a not-for-profit organization, so budget is oftentimes a limiting factor. And anybody who's looked at the pricing schedules for Power BI Premium or Fabric capacities can tell you they're not cheap. And so there's always this balancing act of how do we get the most out of this product while making sure that we don't make the education cost too much for our students. We're trying to make the world a better place by putting more doctors out there, and the more affordable we can make that education, the more likely we are to produce a larger class of good doctors. That's the kind of the balancing act that we're always having to do there. So we also have just this huge backlog of data projects that are waiting for time and funding because of the fact that we are limited in a lot of ways. And until recently, it was just myself that was a full-time employee working on data in the IT department. Only recently were we able to hire a data engineer and another data analyst to work alongside myself to do this work. So for a very long time, we were really extremely dependent on the self-service analytics to try to drive the report creation. So we can talk a little more about that here in a moment. So the new paradigm is to have decentralized and democratized data analytics development, and that is to basically, again, create the centralized models and data infrastructure, and then allow the business users out there in the organization to pick up Power BI Desktop, treat it just like they're making a presentation in PowerPoint, or whipping something up like a SharePoint page and things like that, because it's this easy drag and drop interface. They don't have to know how to write code in most cases. If we create a good model for them and give them the baseline measures, they can pretty much just click and drag and get a good report out of it that way. We're also looking for making interdisciplinary knowledge sharing. So people in the organization who work in various different departments, we want to make sure that they are sharing knowledge with each other about how to do things in Power BI, but also about what's going on with the data in their silos within the organization. There's a lot of the problems that an organization will have around data isn't necessarily just the data being bad or being dirty. A lot of times it has to do with different parts of the organization using the same word to talk about different things. And so the idea is get these people together in the same room and get them to realize that they're using the same word to describe two different things. And so yeah, that's another thing we're trying to do there. So yeah, inter-organizational communication and cross-functional silo busting. So that's what we're going there. So then now we're talking about the founding principles of the Data Dojo, essentially kind of like our charter, if you will. We're going to say we welcome anyone to join. There's no gatekeeping allowed. All of our events are 100% optional. There's no event that you're required to attend if you're a member. It's just a matter of, do you have the time on your schedule and you think you're going to get value out of it? Then come join us. We also encourage our members, but don't require them to share knowledge and collaborate with each other. It's always a great idea to share as much as possible, but some users might, some of the members of the Data Dojo might not feel comfortable sharing yet. Sometimes they're a little shy. So again, it's one of those things we don't require anyone to share, but we do encourage it. We also facilitate the collaboration and communication between our members via two methods. One is by having our actual workshops where we get everybody together in the same room, virtually or in person, and have them collaborating that way. But the other way is via a private Viva Engage group. And Viva Engage is a Microsoft product that's basically a social media site for businesses. And so it's essentially, if you could imagine, like if you had Facebook, but it was just for your work. And I think they actually even do have a Facebook for work thing. But imagine if you just had something like that where you could collaborate and communicate with your coworkers in an asynchronous format, where somebody posts a comment, somebody can go on there and add comments in the thread below it. It supports multimedia stuff. You can ask questions, you can make polls, have events, things like that. So it's this nice platform that makes it easy to stay in touch with each other. And it, yeah. So we'll talk a little more about that later in the presentation as well. Next, we have no instructors or students. We all learn from each other. So any given workshop, I might be teaching some technical things, but there's a lot of things that I don't know about in the organization. I'm particularly lacking in knowledge of the specifics of the data through all of the different business units in the organization. So oftentimes, if there's something that we're doing, somebody is giving a presentation about data in the admissions department or from the alumni relations department, things like that, then I would not be the subject matter expert, and then I would be the student in that scenario. So the idea is that yes, we have organizers of the Data Dojo, and I'm one of them, but I'm not the teacher in every circumstance. So there's also no such thing as a stupid question, or I guess you could say the only stupid question is if one that doesn't get asked. So we just encourage everybody to ask any question they might have. We also vote on the dates and topics for upcoming events. So it's, like I said, a very democratized process. And we encourage our members to network with each other and build those intra-organizational relationships so that they can start having conversations across those boundaries in the organization that previously they wouldn't have ever talked to each other because they never had an opportunity to be in the same room. Now we're getting them in the same room and getting those conversations going and trying to get them accustomed to the idea that, hey, you can work together and try to meet those goals together. All right, so what about recruitment? Calling all data ninjas. How do we decide who should be members of this group? Because obviously it's not everyone in the organization. So one of the ways that I figured out how to do this is, one, I create a Microsoft Forms survey to gauge respondents' interest in joining the Data Dojo and to try to figure out when their availability would be, like what days of the week would be best for them to meet, and their current skill level on things ranging from Excel, Power BI, Power Query, and then we even go all the way down into things like Spark and SQL and Python pandas and things like that. And we have a lot of users in the organization who say they're very skilled in Excel, somewhat skilled in Power BI. There's almost nobody who says anything about Python, but it's a good way for us to figure out like what does the shape of experience look like across our organization, and helps us determine what topics would be good for us to focus on. I also use a thing called the PBI Monitor Report. This is an open source project that was originally written by Rui Romano, who is a Microsoft employee on the CAT team, and it lists all users with active Power BI Pro licenses in the organization, and then I can basically use that, and then I filter out users with no activity logs from the previous 12 months, and then I send a Viva Engage group invite and the Microsoft Forms, a link to the Microsoft form that I mentioned earlier. I send that to the top 20% of Power BI users in the organization by average monthly activity account. So that was my initial recruiting effort, was just that. And that netted me, I think our first meeting, we ended up having 20-some people who were there for an organization where our total faculty and staff is something like 230 or something like that people. It was pretty good attendance. So, all right, first couple of workshops here. First one, we went around and did introductions. We said why we're here and why it matters. We talked about the data growth in our organization, the fact that all of our data was growing in size. It was becoming more significant. There were more data sources. Of course, this data, it basically gets siloed almost automatically unless you put a lot of effort into making sure that it doesn't get siloed. And then, of course, the number of solutions being built on that. We talked about the importance of speed and accuracy in the data analysis process, and what is meant by speed and accuracy when we say those words. And then we talked about the data-driven decision makers in our organization and the things that they often do already know. And then we also talked about their blind spots, the things that they typically don't know yet, and what we can try to do to move the things from the don't know into the do know. All right. Then we also talked about the current paradigm and state of the data analysis in the organization. And we talked about where we want to go for the future, our vision and plans for turning our vision into reality. And then we also, at the very end of that workshop, we had testimonials from 4 Data Dojo members with prior Power BI experience and people who had already worked with me collaboratively on some projects to try to get people accustomed to the idea that, hey, we can you can actually be the people who are doing the report development, and you can rely on me and other subject matter experts in the organization to fill out any parts of your skills that might be missing as you work on those projects. All right. So then our next workshop, we talked about the 5 types of data analytics. One being the descriptive, so what happened, where, and when, and the fact that that's like 90% of all data analytics that we do in business intelligence is just descriptive. It's just saying here's what happened and when. We talked about the diagnostic data analysis. Why did it happen? Predictive, which is what will happen in the future, and the prescriptive, what should we do about it, and then of course cognitive, which is how can we do it better. And I also framed this in a way that that makes a little more sense from the medical perspective, which is say like, if you know, how useful is it if you go to your doctor's office and all they ever do is look at your chart and say, well, here's how old you are, and you know, here is what color your hair and your eyes are, and you know, how your weight and stuff like that. It doesn't actually do anything. You start only getting the value once you start getting into the diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive, that kind of stuff. There's you know, descriptive is fine. You know, you need that as a foundation, but it doesn't really produce a whole lot of value to you unless you actually start getting into these things here. And part of what I was trying to do is basically say to them, look, we need to actually coordinate on building stuff that touches these levels of data analysis, because by default, almost everything is just descriptive. So then we talked about the data analysis cycle. So, you know, of course, every project you have to start with the requirements gathering, then you move on into data ingestion and processing, then on to the data exploration, and then the actual data analysis, building that and then deploying your solution, and then going to your stakeholders and getting them to take it for a test drive, get some feedback from them, take that feedback and work that back into your solution, and then begin the process, sort of repeat the whole cycle. All right. We also talked about structured versus unstructured data, quantitative versus oh yeah, hang on. So we'll go back. Structured data being the like data that's already in tables, versus unstructured, which would be things like image files, and other types of data where it's coming in as like maybe PDFs, things like that. And then quantitative versus qualitative. So quantitative being things like the number of students or the number of exams or the exam scores. Qualitative being things like if a student gives us feedback and they give us a written feedback that says, this is how I felt about this course, you know, that the idea of sentiment analysis, that's more of a qualitative kind of thing. And both are, of course, valuable and can produce valuable insights for the business. We actually had a member who had given a presentation to a conference, and we had that member get up and give that same presentation for us. This was called Better Instruction Through Data, and basically just involved doing a live demo of reports that this member had created using semantic models that were provided by the IT department. Talked about how the insights from those reports are making an impact in that person's business unit, and of course challenges that they encountered and overcome through knowledge sharing and collaboration. All right, so this is where we talk about some of the mistakes that I made as a leader, and hopefully we can help you not make the same mistakes I did. So my 3 big mistakes were I didn't do a good job of setting a consistent schedule at the beginning. So we had our first couple of workshops, and they were, you know, in rapid succession. And then I didn't do a good job of saying, all right, we're going to keep doing these every month or every 2 months or something like that. So it kind of started falling apart. Inconsistent engagement. So like I wasn't communicating frequently with the users or with the members of the Data Dojo through our communication channels. And then I was planning our 3rd workshop, and I had a lot of ideas about where I wanted it to go, and I wanted it to be really, really, really good. But there were a few things that were standing in the way, and I wasn't able, or I guess I didn't have the courage to just say, all right, we got to just get this done and go with it the way that it is, even if it's not perfect. So I was letting perfect be the enemy of good. There were some other contributing factors. We were in the middle of actually migrating to a new campus across town, and we also lost our project manager halfway through this process. So those were other things that they came along that made it worse. But you know, I guess the moral of that story is that, you know, even if you're doing everything perfectly, there can be other things that will come along and try to sideline you, and so you have to be aware of that and try to prepare for that as much as possible. So going a little bit into the specifics on these mistakes, we had plenty of momentum up front, but I didn't have a good roadmap for us. I was trying to find dates that would work for all the members instead of just saying, well, let's try to find a date that works for most of us. So I kept pushing the date of the event back indefinitely, and I wasn't telling members about those delays as we were going along. And so they were probably going like, wow, those first 2 workshops were great, but haven't heard a peep from them in like months now. I guess this thing is probably dead. And they had no reason to think otherwise. So, and then of course the inconsistent engagement. I also wasn't consistently going back and looking at those activity logs to see if we had new members that I should be trying to recruit. So, and then I also wasn't not reaching out on a regular basis to the existing members and asking them, hey, what do you want to see at our next workshop? What are some topics you want to cover? That sort of thing. And then I also wasn't putting new material out into the community for discussion via the Viva Engage group as well. And most of the activity in that group was just happening between the same small group of people who were very passionate about it, and which is great. It was great that they were all talking to each other, but there were a lot more members who weren't participating, just kind of sitting on the sidelines. So my third mistake was, again, letting perfect be the enemy of good. As I said, I had this grand vision for the next event. I was intending to introduce the Power BI version control app, which I was co-developing with Anthony Escobedo and Steve Campbell. And there was a bug, and I was trying to get that bug fixed and rolled out to production. And so, but of course, any software development process, there's always going to be unanticipated delays in rolling out a new version. And so, rather than putting all my eggs in one basket and saying, well, I'm just going to do the next thing. The next event is going to be just about that. I should have pivoted and said, all right, well, that's going to take a while longer. I guess we'll have to wait on that and move on to a different topic. And then, so I kept basically delaying indefinitely, and my perfectionism was obstructing our progress. I really like this quote from a German general in the late 1800s. No plan of operations can with any certainty reach beyond the first encounter with the enemy, Helmut von Moltke. So this is where we move on, and we finally got back on track. The Data Dojo strikes back. So this is I basically the what I had to do to remedy the problems, or make sure that we fix the things that were holding us back. So first, as a leader, I needed to zoom out, recalibrate first, make sure that I was keeping track of the big picture, and then get back into the details. And also, it's a good idea to target attainable goals first, and then set stretch goals. And I also have this issue where I've got basically tunnel vision, and I'm thinking that I'm actually laser focused, but what's actually happening is I'm failing to see the big picture, and that I'm missing some of the information that would steer me in a different direction, but because I'm too focused on one thing, that I'm missing out on that stuff. So, and let's go with another quote from a famous historical general. Strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, and tactics without strategy is a noise before defeat. And that's from The Art of War by Sun Tzu. All right, so how we get back in shape? We have to do a training montage. Cue the cheesy 80s music. Wax on, wax off. So master the fundamentals. We basically have to develop and refine our leadership skills, research and implement community practice best practices, under develop core strength, skilling up at every opportunity, and that includes technical skills and also people skills, sharing knowledge with anyone who expresses interest, and then of course practice related disciplines, things like event planning and project management. Even though leading a group like this isn't actually a project, there's a lot of overlap between project management and leading a group. And so basically getting into and trying to learn from those disciplines as much as possible are the things that can be applied to something like a community practice. All right, so with all of that training in place, now it's time to actually wake the sleeping dragon and get this group back on track. So what I had to do was start scheduling new events as soon as possible. And you can see when we get to the next section here that I did start doing that. So I started a process of now where I'm engaging with our community in Viva Engage. I try to do that as 2 times a week if possible. And sometimes it's just commenting on an existing thread. Sometimes it's posting a new thread and saying, hey, there's this new thing going on. Or earlier this week, or maybe it was late last week, I posted saying, hey, there's this new PBIR format that's in public preview. And I basically said, hey, most of the time with public previews, I will recommend that people start trying it out with this one because there's so many limitations right off the bat that are going to prevent it from being used in a lot of cases in the organization. I said, let's hold off on implementing that new feature until it looks like it's ready. And so I try to spend as much time as possible each week, or putting in a couple times each week where I dedicate some time to go in and engage with the community. And then also I needed to go in and basically recruit a couple more people to help me lead the organization lead the group besides just myself. So I found a couple of deputies to help kind of spread that load out a bit. Also, again, to encourage the members of the group to come forward and show off the things that they've been building recently. I've had a couple of our more recent workshops where demos of some really cool things that some of our members have built. So we'll talk about that here in just a moment. So workshops 3 through 5, I'll try to get through these quickly. So in workshop 3, we talked about technologies and terminologies, and we wanted to make sure that everybody's on the same page when we talk about the terms that we're using. We talk about data governance, data stewards, data lineage, and what those things mean. Talk about data sources, what all of these things like operational data store, online transactional processing, online analytical processing, common separated values, application programming interfaces. These sound very scary when a non-technical user hears them, but once we explain what it actually means, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Talk about on-premises versus cloud data sources, and the extract, transform, load process, the rules, relationships, and routines that are involved in that process as well. We talk about the differences between fact tables and dimension tables, views and stored procedures. We talked about the differences between a data warehouse and a lakehouse, a data flow, a semantic model, and a report. We talk about the importance of star schema and how sometimes it might need to be a little bit of a snowflake, and how we try to, as much as possible, avoid making spaghetti schemas. And then talk about calculated tables, columns, and values, or otherwise known as measures. And we talk about, of course, the difference between a report and a dashboard, and how almost all things that are made in Power BI are actually reports and not dashboards. And when people say dashboard, they usually mean report, and that there's different capabilities there. And we try to make sure that we use the terminology that we actually mean when we're, or use the correct terminology to make sure that we all understand each other. And then talk about the difference between static and paginated reports versus interactive and or Canvas reports. So kind of like your old school, your like SSRS style reports versus the new more sort of Power BI style. Talk about the differences between and kind of similarities between KPIs and OKRs, the key performance indicators and objectives and key results. Things like alerts and subscriptions, and this is where the dashboard thing comes into play, because you can't set alerts on reports, but you can set them on dashboards. And so it's one thing that's like why it's important for us to use the right terminology. And then we have the ideas of the concepts of workspaces, the roles that apply to those workspaces, the apps that are published from those workspaces, the security groups that we use to grant access to those apps or workspaces, and of course the audiences in those apps, where we can have multiple audiences that can see different subsets of the reports in those apps. We talked about role level security and object level security, and how those can be applied to make sure that users see only the data they're supposed to see. And then the ideas of version control, where we start with very simple stuff like SharePoint or OneDrive, all the way through Git integration using the PBIP format. So that was workshop 3. Go on to workshop 4. We talked about installing Power BI Desktop in the Microsoft Store, which is it's important to do it that way rather than just downloading the .exe file, because if you install it from the store, you get automatic updates, and it's just easier to maintain in that way. We talked about we actually have a Data Dojo report template that I've put together with a couple of the Power BI champions. And so we've got like a theme that has all of our like the logo and everything on it, and it's got some demo pages where different it shows you how to make different visuals, different ways that you can implement slicers on the page. And we distributed that to the end users so that they could start playing around with it themselves. It's got like the dummy financial data that comes baked into Power BI from the factory. We actually take that dummy data, and as instead of it being just a flat file, we actually say, here, we're going to take this flat file and we're going to turn it into a star schema. So part of that template is just demoing how to take a flat data file and turn it into a star schema, so people can be accustomed to how that works and how to make that how to do a good job with building a star schema from that. And then we also talked about the differences between implicit and explicit measures, and how to write simple explicit measures in DAX. And we talked about filters, the idea of the filter pane, the report level, page level, and visual level filters. And then, of course, we can also add filters at your model level all the way back in Power Query if you want to make sure the data doesn't even get loaded in the model in the first place. Talk about slicers. Of course, we have the different layouts. We could either be vertical or horizontal. We can have the single select and multi-select, the built-in slicers versus custom slicers, and then the standard on-campus placement of slicers versus putting them in like a show hide panel where you use bookmarks to turn on and off the visibility of that slicer panel, and how that can free up some real estate on the canvas. And then the idea of why would we choose a slicer versus the filter pane, and how we should make that decision, the relative strengths and weaknesses of those, and when and where to use each kind, and then things like how to sort the contents of the visuals. Workshop number 5. This is where we start getting into importing and transforming data. We have one of the functions of that report template is a data freshness indicator. So basically a little icon that you put somewhere on the report that shows different emojis based on the state of the underlying data. So if the data warehouse was refreshed, but the semantic model wasn't refreshed, you show them one symbol. And if the semantic model refreshed, but the data warehouse hadn't been refreshed before that, you show them a different symbol. If it's just not late enough in the day to where that model could be anticipated to have finished refreshing yet, you just put a symbol that looks like a please wait kind of thing on there. So it's like, hey, it's pretty likely this isn't finished refreshing yet, so come back later. Kind of a neat feature, and it basically just connects to the semantic model's information about itself, and a table in the data warehouse that says here's when each of these different schemas finished processing for the day. We also had some utility tables like data source info, which is where that data freshness indicator gets its, or the data source and the data, semantic model info. That's where the DFI gets its data. We also have some of these Power Query parameters like the source workspace and source data flow and a row limit. And those, of course, feed into the custom Power Query functions like get table from data flow, where they can just put in the workspace name, the data flow name, and the table name that they want from that data flow, and have it just give them, here's the contents of that table. Makes it a lot easier to get data so they don't have to connect directly to a SQL data warehouse, and makes it so that, if, for instance, later on, if we change to a new SQL server, as long as somebody goes and updates the source on that data flow, then everything that connects to the data flow will automatically get the data from the new server. And we just abstract away that maintenance from the so that the end users don't have to worry about that kind of stuff themselves. All right, so that's all the workshop reviews we have. We're going to now talk about like the importance of having a hands-on workshop. Slideshows are boring. They're boring to make. You guys are probably bored to tears right now watching this one. And I think to test technical concepts like Power BI are best learned in a live demonstration format, and allowing users to basically interact with like their own copy of it locally on their machine, just like back in kindergarten when when we'd be doing arts and crafts, everybody gets their own copy of it, messing around with it. I think that's the best way to learn anything that we need to be able to create new memories. It makes it much easier to solidify those memories if we can actually be working on it while we're learning about it. I think that following along with the live demo is also more fun, besides just being more memorable. So that's another good reason to use those. And so I think going forward for the Data Dojo at DMU, one of the things we're doing now is that now we've kind of covered all of the basics and all of the definitions of things. We're really not going to do any of that anymore. We've got all those we recorded all those sessions, and we've got them someplace everybody can access them if they want to go back and reference them. But we're really going to focus on just the interactive and hands-on workshops going forward. But then we also have this new style of our events, which is called the Office Hours and Coffee Lounge. The idea was to try to simulate two types of things that you would, or I guess you could say, types of situations you might, or kind of vibes you might encounter on a college campus. One being the office hours, where you go in and you have some questions about the homework from that week, or and somebody who is a subject matter expert, it's either the instructor for the course or one of their teachers' assistants, is going to be in there, and the ability to answer those questions, if you have them, they'll be in that room. And if there's no one there, they're probably grading papers or doing something else. And then the other one is the coffee lounge, where it's just a place where people can socialize, hang out, get to know each other, that kind of thing. So this new format, we basically taken the idea of, okay, well, a traditional Power BI workshop, which takes a lot of time, energy, patience, and coordination to put together, it's a lot of work. But a lot of those sources, those resources are not in plentiful supply, and we have to, and it's really difficult to maintain a consistent schedule. But we need to keep our members engaged, and so the idea behind these office hours and coffee lounge sessions is to take those office hours vibes and those coffee lounge vibes, put it together into a single format where we can have a consistent schedule of days and times each week. Members can drop in, hang out, either just hang out with each other, talk, shoot the breeze, get the kind of water cooler type of thing going on, maybe build those interpersonal relationships that help establish the grounds for collaboration projects in the future. And if no one shows up, whoever's organizing it can just keep working on whatever they would normally be working on. So that basically the meeting's running on the second monitor. If somebody pops in and says, hey, I have a question. Oh, okay, here, let me help you with that. And like I said, it's also just an opportunity for people to, even if they don't have questions, to pop in. And sometimes if you don't have a question and you pop in and you're hanging out, someone else might have a question, and you might go, wow, I never even thought of that. But now that since I was here, I was able to learn about it. And so we're also using it as a way to kind of like provide ideas of maybe some future topics we might want to cover in our traditional workshops as well. So now we're on to the part where we have the resources for Data Dojo organizers. If you would like to start your own community practice, these are the resources I'm going to recommend to you. And if you scan these QR codes that I have on these next few pages here, they'll take you to a page on my GitHub that has all these links, so you can just go straight there. So yeah, the community practice. This is actually a link to the website of the people who originally kind of came up with the idea of a community practice. And then this is the link to Microsoft's website, where they talk about how a community practice integrates in the Power BI adoption roadmap. And yep, there's the adoption roadmap overview. And then here's my blog. And if you go to this specific link, that takes you to the parts of my blog that talk about the community practice specifically. Right now, it's almost all of my posts are about this, but in the future, I'm sure they'll be blogging about other topics as well. All right, and for some reason my mouse is, there we go. All right, and this is down here. This is the software that I mentioned earlier that allows you to monitor your Power BI tenant and look for activities that are people who are using Power BI reports and what licenses they have and that sort of thing, to try to identify which users would be good people to recruit into your community practice. So those are for the organizers. These are resources for Data Dojo members. I've collected these. This is basically just a PDF and Excel. They're the same content. It's just different versions there. And those are a list of basically learning resources on LinkedIn Learning, and that I encourage people who are brand new to Power BI to start using. And they're organized in order of basically experience level. So the ones at the very top are the ones that are like, if you know nothing about this at all, if you don't even know what data visualization is, you start there and you kind of work your way up. And the stuff at the very bottom of it is kind of like mid to intermediate and low expert level kind of stuff. And then if anybody's interested, you can actually see the slide decks from the first two workshops that we had at the organization. So you can kind of get an idea of what leading those workshops might look like. And all right, and that's it. So we're getting to the Q&A session here at the end. And I'm going to go ahead and or did anybody need me to keep those QR codes up on the screen for any longer before we continue here?
Yeah, it looks like we've got a couple people want to see the QR codes
Okay,
again. I'm also going to pull these links and I'm going to send them out to the group in my usual post meetup email,
cool.
so everyone can have those. Um, we have a question from Karen Harker asking, how spaced apart or frequently held were the workshops? And we know that you did go through a little bit of a sort of a hiatus period there. So,
Yeah.
maybe tell us how often you initially met, but maybe think also about what you might have thought the ideal tempo would have been for your workshops.
So at first we were having them once a month. And I think that tempo is a little too fast for organizers to actually be able to get new content out all the time, particularly if you're the only one that's running the thing. If you don't have anybody helping you create new content, plan new workshops, I think that's too frequently, and it probably would also lead to members burning out on the topic pretty quickly. I think that it's probably better to space them out more. It, at least as far as we're talking about traditional workshops anyway. We talk about the office hours and coffee lounge. My goal is to try to have one of those every week or every other week, and we haven't established a consistent cadence on that yet, but we have started having them on a much more frequent basis than our traditional workshops. So we are still at DMU, we are still definitely in the exploring the frequency on both styles of workshops. We have not settled into a consistent cadence on either of them yet. And part of that is that we're still very new at this, and there's still a lot of kind of like, I guess you could say, fallout from our new campus move that's still kind of preventing things from happening on a consistent basis. So we're like, there's some really big projects of migrating servers from the old campus. There's still a lot of stuff that's over there still, and we're trying to migrate that stuff over. So a lot of things that are still keeping us from getting together on a I think I could say a regularly scheduled basis. But eventually we will end up finding, I think, probably our groove and settling into that. And I think that groove is going to be different for every organization, and it's really going to come down to your organization's culture. Like, how fast paced is everything expected to be? If you come in and you come out swinging and you're going way faster paced than anybody else is expecting things to go, they're probably going to go, whoa, 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 whoa. But if you're going too slow, they're probably going to get bored and so I think it's really important to try to figure out what your cadence ought to be, and part of that is just polling your members when you get that first list of people together and using that form to basically get an idea from them of how what days of the week and what times of day they think are the best for them to meet. You might have a question in your form that says, how frequently would you like to meet for traditional workshops? And if we had an office hours, would you like to see that on a weekly basis or an every other weekly basis? And try to gauge their engagement from that. And if you can start that way, I think you're more likely to get closer to a cadence that is right for your organization, rather than kind of like blindly doing it like I did at the beginning and getting it totally wrong. So.
Great. I'll say that also I've allowed people to unmute themselves. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, that is now an option. Speaking of culture, though, so did you see a big culture shift at DMU since you formed the Data Dojo?
Um, Culture for the whole organization? No. Data culture? Absolutely. I would say that we as an organization, we're already pretty data savvy, because again, we're a medical school, and I think that a lot of universities probably can't be expected to have the same level of data literacy across their kind of general population as we do. We're really lucky to have that. So in a way, we were already pretty well prepped for something like this, where I didn't have to convince them that data-driven decision making was a good idea in the first place. So in that sense, yeah, we didn't evolve a whole lot on organization-wide cultural level, but the data culture within that has gotten a lot stronger. And I think that the people who were already doing some of their own, like building some of their own reports, and they were kind of doing it off on their own and not really getting a whole lot of interaction with other business units, are now actually collaborating with each other. We've got a much better framework in place for consistency with having this template now that anybody who wants to build a new report, they're using the template. So the best practices are now a lot easier to maintain because we've already got that stuff kind of baked into the template. So yeah, I don't know if that was that a good answer to the question. Did I answer the question to the mostly?
I think so. And it's sort of, it's a little bit of a segue into the next question that we have, which is, you know, as the community grows at DMU, as people leave the organization and come into the organization, as people grow their skills or change roles, are you recycling any of these workshops? Are you, you know, doing them over again, maybe for a new audience every year? How do you sort of keep the Data Dojo growing, but also, you know, welcome in new members of the community?
We have a extremely low turnover employee-wise. It's, I think, of every place I've ever worked, it's probably the lowest turnover of faculty and staff at this organization. So I haven't found the need to recycle our earlier presentations. However, we have recorded them all, and we have them all posted on an internal video site. It's kind of like our internal YouTube, and it allows anybody who wants to go back and look at earlier presentations to go and look at them. And one of the things we do when we invite someone to the organization or into the Data Dojo for the first time, if they're a brand new member, I think since the original, like I had my original recruitment phase, since then, I think I've only added maybe 7 or 8 people. And it's just been that few people were actually new to the organization or had changed roles in a way that made it so that they were, you know, more likely to be a good candidate for membership. And to those people, I basically, when I send them the invite, I also send them, here's where you can access our back catalog of previous workshop recordings, and they can get access to the slide decks from those. So if they would just want to kind of skim through them, they can do that. So I think that probably at some point, it would be probably a good idea for us to have a big review. But I think a lot of people who are members of the Data Dojo who are consistent attendees, at this point, that would be all kind of superfluous for a lot of them. And so I think if we end up having a review, it would probably be a thing where we basically only invite the people who are new since a certain date, and everybody else, and say, yeah, you know, you can come to this if you want, but it's, you know, you're probably not going to get much out of it. That would be very different based on the organization. I think there's a lot of organizations that probably have higher turnover. You know, any organizations that have like a strong like adjunct faculty kind of situation where you might want to have faculty who are coming on for only a year or so, who you want them to be able to, you know, build reports that show them like their satisfaction scores from their students or their, you know, things like that, to be able to figure out like if they're doing a good job with their teaching, to look at their, you know, the students' grades for their courses and things like that. If you've got a lot of turnover and that kind of stuff, or if you've got a lot of turnover in other departments, or just enough turnover in general that you might need to have a whole repeat of the kind of establishing workshops, then maybe that's good for your organization. But again, like, it's really going to come down to the organization and the culture and the cadence and the how frequently you see new members coming in. So I would say use that PBI monitor tool. Set that up as soon as you can, because when you set it up, it starts tracking from that day forward, and then you'll have the history starting from that day on. And so you can look and see, you know, who's been using reports recently, who used to be using reports and is not using them anymore. Those are all good things, of ways you can reach out to people and say, hey, it looks like you started using Power BI recently, or it looks like, hey, I noticed that you stopped using Power BI reports a while ago. Did you, it's a good way to try to reach out to people and figure out if something is going wrong or if things are going right. So definitely, if you can set that up sooner rather than later, because the longer your logs are, the better your big picture is, and the easier you can find trends in it.
Yeah. I mean, I got to say, I've taken a lot of notes here, and I think there are a lot of lessons that we can take away from the Data Dojo experience for this user group, even. A greater emphasis on show and tell. I would love to get
Hmm.
members of the community to do a little more show and tell. And you and Jeff and I have talked about the idea of doing office hours and workshops and so on.
Hmm.
So I want to entice everyone who's on this meeting and listening to this right now or watching the recording on YouTube, please don't be afraid to, volunteer for a little show and tell if you have something that you've worked on, you want to get some feedback on, or you just want to showcase what you've developed. And at the same time, to let you know that we are thinking about things like, Power BI office hours and workshops for this community, the higher ed Power BI user group. So more to come on that soon. The last question we have in the chat is from Karen again, who's
Hmm.
asking, how do you balance participation from members so that the same set of people don't dominate your sessions, especially the office hours? And I think this is a challenge that a lot of organizations have when you've got maybe one or two people who are your Power BI wizards, and they're often leading these groups. So, what have you done in the Data Dojo to try and incentivize other members of the group to participate and not just cede the floor to your wizards and your gurus?
Yeah, I think with the office hours and coffee lounge, the idea is that it's there for people who don't know yet to come and ask questions, and if they already do know, it's just a way for people to come together and hang out. And so, the when we have those events, it's not like we're saying come in here and present about what you've been doing. It's not like come in here and brag about the latest thing you built. I mean, certainly if it's related to somebody's question, like somebody has a question about how to implement a data freshness indicator, if I was the person who built that, I could come in and then say, oh yeah, I'll show you how to do that. Here's a report where I've done that and show here's how I wrote the DAX measures. Here's the Power Query that was necessary to get it all working. But I think that in general, and this could be again be just an organizational thing. Most of the people in our organization don't seem to have a tendency to want to dominate conversations. I don't know if it's just a personality thing or a cultural kind of thing. In our organization, if people come to an office hours kind of thing, they're expecting to ask questions or to be able to answer questions, and that's really the idea, is just to get people together and try to get those questions answered, and get people a chance to get to know each other. And for the most part, our the traditional workshops are really well attended. 20, 25 people will often attend these. The office hours have been attended by a much smaller group of people, but there are people who have questions, and so it's usually maybe 4 or 5 or 6 people attending those things. And so sometimes I'm sitting there basically just doing my work, and somebody will pop in 30 minutes in after the thing starts. I answer their question, they say thanks, and they leave, and then I'm back to doing my own work for the rest of the time. So we don't really have to worry about people dominating those too much because there's not much to dominate. So I don't know if I understood the question well enough, or maybe I might have missed something there, but at least at DMU, it hasn't seemed to be much of a problem. I haven't had to put any like moderation policies in place to make sure that nobody is, you know, hogging the mic, so to speak.
Yeah.
But certainly, I mean, that might come up. It could be that eventually I've got some loudmouth will join our group and just be, constantly talking about their stuff nonstop, and I might have to take them aside and say, hey, so you need to let some of the other people talk sometimes.
Yeah, I think that question probably just comes, from more of a perspective of wanting to hear different voices,
Hmm.
varied inputs, not just hearing, the central IT guy's perspective on Power BI, but
Right.
also, how is college relations using this? How is academic affairs using this?
Yeah.
Putting more voices in the room, so you can hear a diversity of perspectives. And so I think some of what you've outlined with the Data Dojo is, provides a lot of opportunity for that, to get people together, to showcase the things that they're working on, to ask questions, and over time even, start to develop your voice and become more of a leader in the group. Um, I think that there's ample opportunity for that. And a lot of that, some of that comes down to the organization and the culture that you create and so on. But I think that the Data Dojo gives you a really good venue to develop some of these people and build up their confidence to the point where they can start contributing more, and become a leader in Power BI at your organization.
Absolutely. That's kind of the idea, is like, I don't want to be the person that everyone comes to when they have a question about Power BI, because if that's always the case, I'll never be able to get anything else done. I'm trying to like basically spread the expertise out into the organization so that every business unit has their own little, because for the longest time, we've had Excel experts in every part of the business. I want to make sure that we take that same approach and say, now we're going to have a Power BI expert in every business unit. And when someone in their business unit has a question about data, I want them to go to that person and say, hey, how do I do this in Power BI? And that way we've democratized the whole process and made it so that it's more about that structure, rather than being like a pipeline for questions to go up the chain to somebody who has expertise and then have the answers flow back down to them. Have it, rather than that, have it be that structure is really just about having the centralized data models, the data infrastructure, and things like that. And yes, there can be a sharing of knowledge along those vertical pathways, but we also want a lot more knowledge sharing to be happening along horizontal pathways. And to that end, I'm trying to make it as horizontal of an organizational structure as possible. That's part of why I say I'm not the teacher and they're not the students. We're all there as peers with each other. Some of us are there to kind of facilitate the meeting, but other than that, we're not really thinking of it in a hierarchical way. And that's also really important to try to make sure that that everybody feels like they are an equal part of it, and really have that sense of ownership. Everyone has a stake in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the founding principles that you articulated at the start of your presentation definitely speak to sort of the egalitarian nature of the Data Dojo. And so that's really admirable. And I think that that's something that we should definitely strive for in these kinds of communities.
Yep. I think of it kind of like a co-op, where like we're all co-owners of this thing. We're all in it together. And if we do it well, we all profit from it. So, yep.
Great. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'll just remind everyone to look out in your emails. I'm going to send a message that has links to the Power BI adoption roadmap, to some of the resources that James posted in his presentation. Circulate those to the entire group, and hopefully you all can get some good use out of those. Stay tuned for announcements about upcoming meetings and so forth. James, thank you so much for your presentation. I've been looking forward to hearing about the Data Dojo for a long time. I know this has been, years in the making, and you're still refining the approach. And it's really cool to see, to see this presentation given to a group of higher education professionals. And hopefully we can start taking the lessons that you've learned and the things that you've built, and then start to repurpose them for our own organizations, build our own Data Dojos. So thank you so much, James, for doing this. Thank you to everyone for your questions, for your time. This will be on YouTube, so look for it later today or tomorrow, and greatly appreciate everyone. And yeah, any final words?
One more thing, anybody who has questions for me that we weren't able to cover today, or if you think of other questions, hit me up on social media. My DMs are open.
All right. All right, thanks everyone. That's it for today. We will see you in July. And until then, take care of yourselves.
All right.
And enjoy some Power BI.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.